Hello and thank you for joining us on Newsweek, where we highlight some of the biggest stories that made the headlines recently. I am Jacinta Obiuku. This week, President Muhammadu Buhari presented the 2023 budget as Nigeria's federal budget proposal surges past an unprecedented 20 trillion naira. Reports say capital expenditure, which covers projects with a direct impact on citizens, will receive no extra funding from last year. Also this week, the last batch of 23 hostages has been released after terrorists attacked and abducted passengers of a Kaduna-bound train 6 months ago. Later on the show, we will take a look at the appeal court's directive for ASU to resume work as the federal government budgets 470 billion naira budgeted for varsity body. All the details in the moment. Stay with us. Now, it's been 7 cycles of budget presentation with the same routine but different figures for President Muhammadu Buhari, who this week presented a budget of 20.5 trillion naira for the 2023 fiscal year. As it's now customary, the 2023 budget will be accompanied by a finance bill to support the realization of fiscal projections. Details in this report.
And final budget presentation by President Muhammadu Buhari as his administration winds down in another 7 months. The President of the Senate commends both arms of government for the return of the budget cycle to between January and December in the last 3 years. Ahmed Lawan and Speaker Femi Gbajabiamila acknowledged the trouble with the nation's economy arising from dearth of revenue, but the massive stealing of crude, which has impacted negatively on the nation's economy, leaves much to be desired. They insist crude thieves are enemies of the country and should be treated as such. For 55 minutes, President Muhammadu Buhari takes a prospective look at the efforts of his government at reshaping the country with the current budget, as well as projections for the coming year. Transformational investments in infrastructure tops the list of his administration's achievements. The president says a challenging global economy, high inflation, high crude oil prices, and Russia-Ukraine war have contributed to the nation's troubled economy. Nevertheless, he says government is determined to shore up its revenue from taxation and the internally generated revenues of NDAs.
Our interventions and reflationary measures have been very effective and impactful. We must, however, continue to work towards achieving much higher levels of growth, especially given our high population growth rate, so that the average Nigerian can truly feel the impact of planned economic growth.
The parameters for the proposed budget include oil price benchmark of $70 per barrel of crude, daily oil production at 1.69 million barrels per day, inclusive of condensates of 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day, exchange rate of 435.51 naira to US dollar, and a projected GDP growth rate of 3.75% and 17.16% inflation rate. The president also touched on the current ASU strike and renews his appeal to university teachers to return to class. He says education cannot be solely funded by the government. The 8th and final budget presentation.
Joining me now via Zoom, I have Manager, Open Government and Institutional Partnership Budget, Tolulokpe Ogunloye. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari noted that the 2023 transition budget was designed to address critical issues and lay a solid foundation for the incoming administration. Help us understand in detail the facts and figures.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on this program. So as we all know, Mr. President presented a budget of 20.51 trillion. And it simply means that the total revenue projection is at 9.73 trillion, and we have a deficit, definitely, because that is what our budget is a deficit budget. So we have a deficit of 10.78 trillion, because if you had the projected revenue with the deficit, that will give you the total expenditure that the nation wants to spend in 2023. And yeah, the revenue breakdown simply means that the oil revenue is at pegged at 1.92 trillion. We have the non-oil at 2.43 trillion, the independent revenue at 2.21 trillion, and so on. And so the expenditure is there also for everyone to see. But the major thing for us to also point out is the capital component of the budget, which stands at 5.35 trillion out of the 20.51. And so, which is worrisome, because it simply means that larger chunk of the funds will be going to payment of salaries, will be going to the statutory deductions and then a pension, but which falls under recurrent. But then the capital component of itself, which speaks to the needs of the people, stands at 5.35 trillion. And so it simply means that maybe lesser capital projects will be implemented come 2023, but we all know that this is also dependent on how well we generate revenue as a country.
All right, Tolulope, with the current economic situation and the level of Nigerians' indebtedness, do you think the president can finance this budget, or are we going to keep borrowing?
So every nation borrows. I don't think anyone would say as a country, it is bad for us to borrow, but the key question would be, what are we borrowing the money for? And so if you're borrowing to pay salaries, that is worrisome. But if you're going to be borrowing to build infrastructures that would be of benefit to the citizens, that is simply a welcome idea. And so as it stands, definitely we'll have to borrow in order for us to fund the budget, because I mentioned earlier, we have a deficit of 10.78 trillion. And we all know the last debt stock that was published by DMO stands at I think 42.8 trillion. And so it simply means that we already have a backlog of a whole lot of money that the country is owing, which simply means with the budget that is coming forth, then we also need to borrow in order for it to work. Like I said, a budget is just a budget on paper. There are projections, there are estimates. But in order for it to be implemented at 100%, we need revenue to fund the budget. And as at that revenue, Nigeria is not doing well at all. And we need to do better as a country.
All right, finally, before I let you go, there are also concerns on how the 2022 budget impacted the Nigerian economy, and how can Nigeria do better with implementation in the coming year?
So in order for us to do better as a nation, I think one of the things that budget will always say is for us to expand the tax net, because we know definitely there are a whole lot of people that are still evading tax. And so I'm not saying government needs to increase the tax rates, but then the tax net, so that in order for us to have a whole lot of people that are not paying tax, because we all need to look at different ways to generate revenue as a country. And so we need to look at so many areas in order for us to be able to get revenue. And so one of the things also that I always say is there are loopholes everywhere. And so if you can block all the loopholes in order for us to recover diluted funds, it simply means that we would all manage what we see. Most people will say revenue is not a problem in the country, but the major thing is managing the resources that we have so that it doesn't get to the wrong hands. And so what we need to do as a country is generate revenue. The revenue we are generating we also need to ensure that it's not going into the wrong hands. So to block all the loopholes in order for us to probably reduce the level at which we borrow the funds from other countries. And so that's one of the things I would suggest.
All right. Thank you very much for your contribution. The Manager, Open Government and Institutional Partnership Budget, Tolulope Ogunloye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. We will now take a short break, and Newsweek continues in a moment. Stay with us.